I'm going to introduce Sam Lee, our next speaker. He has a strategy director background in the financial services industry and has brought together high-yield investment products for investors who want to work with cryptocurrencies. We'll probably be asking him about that. Sam also established a marketing agency that helps retailers accept Bitcoins and is one of the organizers of the Melbourne Bitcoin Meetup. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sam Lee.
Hi, everyone. Where do I click?
There you go.
Ah, perfect. Okay. Hi. I'm from Melbourne, actually. So it was quite an interesting flight over. First time out of the airport, and the taxi driver said it was a 40-degree day, and I'm like thinking, gosh, haven't had such a hot day in Melbourne for quite some time. So still adjusting, but hopefully I'll be better tomorrow. So what I want to talk about is Bitcoin is currently going through a process where it is evolving. It'll get there. It'll definitely get there. But it is now in the transition phase towards mainstream. And the role of government in setting up the right regulatory framework is so critical to the success of the local Bitcoin ecosystem. And I have seen that firsthand because my comparison actually comes straight from Australia and China. So, we've already had quite a few speakers, and we already know how awesome Bitcoin is. You know, it's a disruptive technology that could change the remittance and payments industries. Portable, divisible, digital commodity that is an unbanked store of wealth. So, through this alone, we already could see that it is essentially the next iteration of gold. So I think I use decentralized trust network, but obviously we all call that this slightly differently. So, and obviously there's revolutionary blue sky potential later down the track. So regulators hold the key because we're talking about the success and failure of a country's adoption of digital currency, hinging completely on what they do to help foster a playground to help Bitcoin startups grow. And Australia has been, I think, the pinnacle example of success when it comes to dealing with the right taxation guidance to essentially help businesses and individuals get to know Bitcoin from little baby steps. We're already seeing Bitcoin attracting a lot of VC and angel investment, and we're seeing Bitcoin startups eventually becoming the next billion-dollar industries. We could clearly see that because Bitcoin startups can only thrive when the industries are supported by regulation and government. And regulation matters because we're talking about New York being the epicenter of the global exchanges, London becoming the global currency markets, and maybe Brisbane becoming the digital currency, the epicenter of the digital currency markets. It's all entirely possible. The reason being is regulations shape Bitcoin landscape significantly through this following example. We have the China Bank, the Bank of China, which is a state-owned enterprise, that basically says Chinese currency can be traded for bitcoins by its citizens. It could be traded without capital gains. And as a result, we have the top 3 exchanges all residing in China. They take up, collectively, on average, 86% of the global trade volume. US, however, has a state and a federal level viewpoint when it comes to AML and remittance licenses, and the result of which is no Bitcoin exchanges would want to incorporate themselves in the States. So the Chinese, however, have said Bitcoin cannot be exchanged for products or services. And this means no merchants in China, if you look at coinmap.org, no merchants in China would ever accept Bitcoin for a payment of a product or service. Whilst in the States, in contrast, it's flourishing. You've got Bitcoin boulevards popping up left, right, and center. I think this is a repeat of a slide. So Australia really has an opportunity here to become a digital currency leader. It is positioned to have the most comprehensive tax guidances, and even on certain websites has how-to guides on allowing small to medium-sized businesses adopting Bitcoins on a merchant level. A progressive and supportive attitude from the capital markets means that we've already got a reverse-listed company, DCC, and a Bitcoin group, which is soon to list. And we believe that what we play in the ecosystem in Australia is to build a legitimate, transparent, and accessible vehicle for investors to expose themselves into the Bitcoin ecosystem. And this is something that the Chinese have been looking to get involved in. But because of their current regulatory stance within China and the uncertainties there, it means the Bitcoin ecosystem in China cannot grow without having us assist them through an overseas entity. So the 3 segments within the Bitcoin ecosystem I think are important are market making, payment systems, as well as Bitcoin mining. And that's what our listing will be focused on. And through this, we will then extend our IPO listed legitimacy to the China market. So, our advantages is that we have been the only positive news within the Chinese Bitcoin ecosystem all year. The announcement in October was the one that got syndicated to over 40 tier 1 press within China. And that was only made possible because we got it through the Fairfax network and therefore made it relevant. And if they were to, for instance, blanket the story, that would be all too obvious censorship. And as I highlighted before, we want to essentially put our heads on the chopping block here by saying that investing in an Australian IPO listed company will effectively mean the money will be transparent and legitimate. And then when it's reinvested into back into the Bitcoin ecosystem, there won't be any bad practices, because at the end of the day, our reputation is on the line here. And I think that's what the industry really needs. So, digital currency like Bitcoin will definitely change the world, and I believe that with the right guidance and assistance from the government and regulators, Australia can be the next powerhouse in the digital currency revolution. And if Australia does not, or any country does not embrace Bitcoin, they will essentially be subject to a similar scenario where North Korea doesn't embrace the internet. So, thanks.
So we can have, if you have a seat, then we can have a little conversation. Can I get that mic up? There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Sam. So, it'll come up in a second. We could give them a second. I was really, really struck by what you said as Bitcoin is the next iteration of gold. I think that's essentially the ATO's point of view with it, isn't it? They consider Bitcoin a commodity rather than a currency, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Can we get, what, is it off? Hold on, it might be turned off. Sorry, that was my bad. I'm sure I turned it off right before the break.
So, yeah, I believe because of its predictable nature of inflation and its overall deflationary nature, it models itself according to gold. And because of its scarcity, it actually allows us to utilize that as a remittance platform.
Well, except we haven't stopped mining all the gold in the world. And yet in what is it, 2030, 2029, we mine the last Bitcoin, 2031? I forget, someone in here must know. 2140? Yeah, well, you'll mine 0.99, it's like going to the speed of light. All right, so in 2140, then we get to the last Bitcoin. So I guess at some point in the future, we'll stop mining them. So gold is not fundamentally deflationary in that sense, in that there's a constant supply of gold entering the market, but the number of Bitcoins is going to trail off.
Well, that's not always a bad thing, because at the end of the day, if we're talking about an alien race coming over to Earth and seeing us dig up this yellow rock from the ground, smelting it, and then putting it back into another ground with high security guards, I think that's quite silly, don't you?
Fair enough.
Huge waste of resources.
Okay, so to Bitcoin Group, so there's a lot of Bitcoin businesses out there, and none of them have IPO'd yet?
Not through a front door listing, yes.
Right, I can say they've reverse IPO'd, but they haven't actually gone through a front door listing. So, I mean, if you have a first in the world position on this, I mean, first off, you have to make sure that you don't screw it up, because then you ruin it for everyone else. But you also, I suppose, no pressure, but I also suppose that at the same time you have to be thinking about what that turns you into. I mean, the first company in the internet space to IPO arguably would have been Yahoo, right? And Yahoo sort of set the stage for all of the other, for the Netscapes and all the other companies that would follow after it. So how do you see, I mean, if you're aligning yourself in that tradition, what does the Bitcoin Group sort of mean in terms of the overall arc of Bitcoin as a public currency?
Well, we're true believers in that the value is going to be constantly increasing due to the nature of demand outstripping supply. Mm-hmm. So our core focus is in actually Bitcoin mining, because that is the only way in today's market you're able to generate Bitcoins at below market value. So you think of the gold mine. Current gold price, let's say, is 1,200. Gold mines probably produce the same amount of gold for $1,000, and the cream is their profit. So you're going to be establishing, it's funny because I just saw some lovely pictures, quite disturbing pictures of the mining fire that happened in Thailand a few weeks ago, where this vast array of machines caught fire and melted down. Is that essentially the business that you're going to go into? Not the fire business, but the setting up of the large Bitcoin mining farms? Yeah, that's correct. And to be honest, that's done by a bunch of amateurs. So
Well, clearly it burnt up, right? Yeah.
yeah, in Thailand, and the configuration's all wrong, too close together. The power supplies were all not suited to that kind of humidity and environment, etc.
So do you see yourself then, are you more like a BHP than you are like a Suncorp?
Well, think of it this way. We cannot go into an IPO, list with a lot of money, and then squander it on blue sky projects because, sure, we'll list very quickly, but we'll also go bankrupt very quickly as well. Bitcoin mining is something that will return you more than more in terms of Bitcoins than what you would have been able to buy on the open market at that point in time. It's a long-term play, and because Bitcoin mining is not 100% legitimate in China, the Chinese mining industry reaches out to us and supports our IPO in order to help us extend our IPO listed legitimacy to them in China.
So in other words, they're outsourcing, because they're forbidden to mine, they can outsource it by purchasing stock in your company.
Yes, and purchasing stock in our company will effectively allow them to be more liquid with their investment as well.
So, I mean, can you I'm actually really interested in understanding the model of the business. You know, for X number of dollars of investment, what degree of return are you? I mean, now that you're doing an IPO, you probably have this all laid out in your paperwork for them. But what kind of return do you expect to be able to generate for $1 invested in shares in the company?
Well, this is a tricky question because it all depends on how well you time your mining cycles. So the way we work...
Okay, step back. What do you mean by your mining cycles? I mean, is there an overall fluctuation in the Bitcoin price? Is that what you mean, or...?
Well, when you go into mining, you don't really care too much about the Bitcoin prices. What you care about is getting access to the best hardware and
staying ahead of the curve of the latest chips, the latest ASICs that are used to create to mine.
That's correct.
Okay.
Don't you forget, China created the first ASIC chips, but the reason they're falling behind the 8 ball on that is because they cannot, similarly like Bitfury, raise the capital needed in order to continually do their R&D to develop more advanced chips. The result of which is all of a sudden the tables have turned. Given Australia has such great regulatory clarity around tax guidance and investing in the Bitcoin ecosystem, it allows us to very easily convince and get buy-in from the Bitcoin ecosystem within China. And that's all we're relying on, to be honest. If Australia was to tomorrow say no, Bitcoins are illegal, then that's all our strength gone.
So, are you using your own ASICs, or are you buying ones off the market? Do you have a design arm that's designing a new generation? So is engineering part of that task, or is it simply taking the latest generation in that part of the sense of being on the curve?
Well, designing ASIC chips is very high risk if you don't know what you're doing. It requires the brightest minds in engineering. To then assemble them into mining rigs requires a understanding of logistics and large-scale manufacturing. And then to install all these mining machines into mining farms require, how should I put it, networks within local government to acquire cost-effective electricity. So in other words, each tier cannot forward or backward integrate into each other. And because of that, we play our specific role, which is to integrate with capital markets, with traditional capital markets, and bring that capital into the Bitcoin ecosystem.
All right, who has questions for Sam? I mean, I've got a billion more, but I'm figuring that you guys do too. Do you have it? Have we run out of microphones? So Sam and I are going to share a microphone. You can have this one.
Sam.
Hi.
Hi, Angus. I was watching the rise and rise of Bitcoin last night, and so I guess, and we're talking about the decentralization nature of the Bitcoin currency, and the fact that I think the creator of the documentary was talking about he was mining, and obviously he couldn't keep up with the hardware costs, so therefore he had to sell it back. Are we going to a stage whereby potentially the computational power of companies like yourselves will end up causing a centralisation of Bitcoins, and therefore the ability to manipulate the supply side of the Bitcoin itself? I guess that's my issue in terms of whoever has the most money to invest in the mining will potentially own or become a central reserve, I guess you could say, a bit like of gold. But companies like yourselves, therefore owning a lot of the Bitcoin and manipulating the supply side.
Well, there's always people out there manipulating prices of all sorts of commodities and penny stocks. So Bitcoin is no different. We received the slaying of a bear whale a couple of weeks ago, and that was a bit of fun. Kept me up all night. But at the end of the day, I believe that market forces will bring everything back down to means, and for the amount of capital we're raising, which is 20 mil, is not significant enough to gain more than 15 to 20% of the global hash rate. So in other words, when we do something, the overall network hash output, so the 51% attack.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, so your concern is we gain 51% control of the network and then could manipulate pretty much anything, really, to stop transactions going through, etc. I honestly don't think no one actually has the financial capacity at this stage to do that. And even if they do that, they're incentivized to see Bitcoin succeed because they're mining Bitcoins. So if they do something malicious, well, that's just throwing away money, isn't it?
Okay, before the question, one very small correction, but very important. That's People's Bank of China you're talking about in your slide. This is because it's important because in China there is a de-people movement to remove the word people from all the governmental organizations to show that people don't believe these represent the people. So you are, by saying Bank of China instead of People's Bank of China, it's hinting that you're part of the anti-people, de-people movement happening in China. It's kind of, I don't think you are because apparently a word was missing there. So there's one small correction. The question is, you said that you are basically taking advantage of transparency and regulation consistency of Australia to work to make Chinese mining system to work. And by saying this, your business also rely on China's scrutiny against mining industry in the following years. So you have to do two things have to be right. First, the regulatory action in Australia has to be consistent in the next few years. And second, China should go on to forbid mining and other Bitcoin activities in the 5 years for this business model to be successful. Is it right?
Well, we're not going to just have all our eggs in one basket. The only reason we say China is because right now they're producing, especially through Avalon, very good quality chips, and we have access to them. Now, for us to then relocate these chips and have them assembled into machines elsewhere is not a problem as well. As long as the electricity cost is low, we're more than happy to, set this up anywhere else. We're hardware agnostic at the end of the day. We just care about return on investment so that our investors gain. The other question about the
People's Bank is...
with regards to, sorry?
Well, the policy organization in China, and actually one of the wealthiest, the wealthiest financial institution in the world, it's People's Bank of China. The Bank of China is the other one.
Yeah, okay. So a bit of a typo there, but all right. The other question was in regards to, there was one more.
Okay, I was asking whether or not the promise, whether or not the return of investment, the return of investment is based on two things. First, the consistent regulatory action in Australia, and second, consistent scrutiny of Chinese government regulation. Correct?
Yeah. So to cover off on the Australian side, I believe in a democratic system where we're able to lobby and we're able to vote. So at the end of the day, in this country, if we say something that it makes sense and benefits the government and aligns with their digital economy goals, then I don't see why they should essentially shut off this very revolutionary new product.
Do you have to convince the investors that China's scrutiny against Bitcoin will go on?
Well, we have a lot of investors who come from China to invest in our IPO. And so they believe that the Chinese government won't, in fact, touch mining if they were to, if these mining operations were in part owned by an Australian entity.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Sam Lee. Thank you.